I'm joined by Annaline van der Poel. She's from Debt Rescue. Thank you very much, Annaline, for joining us. So the latest inflation is still well below the Reserve Bank's midpoint of its 3 to 6% range. But food inflation seems to be edging up somewhat. And of course, this is important given that a significant proportion of households use the bulk of their expenditure on things like food and transport as well.
Indeed, yes. And of course, we're really glad to see that it's still sitting in that 3 to 6 or below the 3 to 6%. But realistically speaking, exactly as you said, the areas where we're seeing the highest increase are the ones that are hitting our pockets as consumers directly. When we start talking about meat prices going up as much as they have, vegetables up 10.3% from 6 months ago. Those are staples. Maize meal up 14.2%, SAMP 20.6%. Those are all staples in households, and especially what that does to our pockets. It means that on the one side we're watching the oil price with everything that's going on, obviously in the international conflicts, the tariff hikes, etc. What does this mean for us as consumers? Every single month we are moving backwards financially.
Yeah, no, just to pick up on what you were saying about the fuel price, of course, that's come down quite a bit on a year-on-year basis, which is very positive. But given everything that's happening in the Middle East, that could then reverse. But I think the issue that I wanted us to deal with is the fact that there doesn't seem to be any fiscal room, from National Treasury to be able to support us when there are these shocks. Like, for example, should the price of oil jump by $20-30, we're not going to get that much support. So it means that the consumer could be in a very tricky space.
Very much so. I mean, we've got to remember that part of the budget announcements is a fuel levy that's been implemented, which means that the fuel price reduction we were hoping for last month wasn't nearly what we ended up getting because of that. So there is no room in the fiscal budget to accommodate us as consumers. And like I said, as you mentioned, we have now seen the fuel price come down. But most of our goods is transported by road, and we'd expect if the fuel price comes down that our food prices should be coming down as well, and yet they're not. They're actually the ones that are going up. So there's no relief in sight for us, and there's no area where we're being buffered as consumers ultimately.
Yeah. So Annaline, what are your thoughts around how the Reserve Bank has approached interest rates cuts? I mean, given that inflation has been relatively low for quite some time, but it's not exactly been very aggressive in bringing rates down.
Well, obviously, we've known that the Reserve Bank Governor and the MPC have been very, very cautious for a very long period of time with regards to their decisions, and they've shown it. And we've seen it. Each time that they meet, that it's either held steady or when it comes down by 0.25 basis points. We were lucky to see it with the last announcements. It was a 0.25. I know that it was a split decision, hoping for a 0.5. But it's not nearly enough for us as consumers, ultimately. I mean, that 0.25% we calculated on I think it was a 1.5 million rand budget bond. It's about 250 rand saving in your pockets. So realistically speaking, yes, it's a reduction. Of course, we are ever so thankful to see that little bit of relief in our pockets. But what does it mean for us in the big picture? Very little, because we're facing, still technically looking at a cost of living crisis if we're looking at food prices going up in the way that they are.
Yeah. And very quickly, Annaline, what would you say? What's your assessment of how the South African consumer is doing relative to last year?
My opinion, from what we can see, our observations are worse off, definitely. Consumers are struggling more. I mean, even though we have now started to move into this lower inflation cycle and the interest rate reductions, from a consumer perspective, they're not feeling it. They're almost definitely, they stretch beyond their limits. We've done surveys where we've seen that they are using their credit cards, they're using the facilities that they still have available to literally put fuel in their vehicles, to pay for electricity and to buy food ultimately, which is definitely indicative of how dire it is out there.
Annaline, thank you so much for your time and insights there. That was Annaline van der Poel. She's from Debt Rescue. The South African Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy President, is Paul Mashatile. He's in Russia to boost trade ties and promote the country as an investment destination. During his working visit, he'll be rubbing shoulders with global business leaders at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. SABC News correspondent Dasha Cheshirshova has more from Moscow.
The goal of the visit is to strengthen bilateral economic and trade ties between South Africa and Russia, with a big focus on the agriculture, automotive, energy and mining industries, as well as science and technology cooperation. Trade turnover has been steadily growing between the countries and exceeded $1.2 billion last year, with almost a half of that coming from the agriculture industry. Moscow has been expanding its ties with its non-Western partners, and South Africa is interested in exporting more to Russia. Mashatili will visit two Russian cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, to attend high-level engagements as well as economic diplomacy activities. In Moscow, Mashatili is due to meet with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, and in St. Petersburg he will attend the annual St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Mashatili is expected to participate in the forum's key event, the plenary session, along with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Mashatili has also been invited to participate as a speaker in the Russian-African Business Dialogue. This year, International Economic Forum is held under the theme of Shared Values, the foundation of growth in a multipolar world. On the sidelines of the forum, Deputy President is scheduled to deliver a public lecture at the St. Petersburg State University called South Africa's G20 Presidency in a rapidly changing geopolitical environment. The St. Petersburg leg of the visit is expected to leverage on promoting South Africa's trade relations and South Africa as an investment destination. Dasha Chernysova, SABC News, Moscow.